fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons. Like diamonds back again. Got a crew here. Lukey, Matt, and the Yak. Marky Mark, Funky Bunch. What's up, dudes?
What's going on, man?
A new debate to discuss.
Big debate. Basically is why watermelon smell is a dead giveaway for speckled trout. So there's quite a few articles on this, apparently. Luke's still not a believer. He's a Justin Bieber fan. He's a believer, but not a believer in this. But we're in a tournament with Mark and his wife, Ashley. And Ashley says, "Oh my gosh, stop. I smell watermelon. There's trout nearby." And Luke and I look back at her like, "What did you put in your coffee this morning?" And lo and behold, there was trout nearby. And so they went on to tell us this long story about how every time they're finding a big trout hole, there's the smell of watermelon in the air. And I'm not smelling it personally. Luke's not smelling it. So I was like, maybe this is kind of like asparagus, where some people can smell asparagus in their pee. You know what I'm talking about? Like, dude, I can smell it if there's someone 10 over in the urinal. I can smell they had asparagus. And there's some people they can't smell on themselves. So I was like, what's going on here? I smell no watermelon. We get back to the house and Mark and Ashley keep talking about this watermelon thing. And it's all over the place that trout slicks smell like watermelon. What the heck? So what do you guys think? Have you actually smelt this? Any of you besides Mark?
I haven't.
Luke hasn't. Matt?
Yeah, I think it's okay. If you haven't ever caught fish, it's okay to just say that, but, I can tell you 100%, there's no question. You get into a good spot where trout have been feeding actively, no question. It's so pungent. It smells like somebody's cutting watermelon on the boat or on the kayak. You know it without a doubt. It's absolutely a very real thing.
I'm having trouble in my nostrils right now thinking about I know what watermelon tastes like. Maybe this is part of maybe I can't smell it. Like what does someone cutting watermelon in the kitchen, does that bring like a smell to you, Luke?
Yeah, again, I can't put a finger on it either.
Maybe that's my problem.
Yeah.
So let me ask you
it sounds
this.
like, because I fish Tampa Bay all the time, and that's where Mark fishes, and you and your wife have smelt this many times in Tampa Bay, and I'd like, maybe I'm just not paying attention to it, or I don't have the right gene or something, but I never really pick up on it.
So if you walk into a house where somebody's been cutting watermelon, you don't know?
I don't know that I do.
Oh, I know without a doubt. I come back from fishing. My ladies cut watermelon for the boys during the day. I know. I know it ain't me smelling like trout when I walk in the house. I smell it on the water.
Wait, so you could walk into a house and before visually seeing watermelon, you know that it's been cut?
Yeah. I got I got a nose, man. Yeah, it smells.
I can smell cookies, I smell bacon, I smell egg, I smell hamburger, steak. I'm like, oh, coffee. What? I don't know, watermelon. Like, I got some watermelon gum extra. I smell that, but that to me, that doesn't smell like what you're describing as cut watermelon. It smells like trout. It smells like trout.
I feel like once you smell it, you can't not smell it. Like we'll be out there and we'll be fishing and she'll smell it and say, "Oh, power pull down. I smell watermelon," and we'll start catching trout. So I feel like once you guys smell it, you're going to be able to smell it every time.
Yeah, I
Maybe that's true.
I usually smell it. So when I can find it most or best is usually in the spring. right during the initial trout spawn when those fish are really hungry and really actively feeding shallow on the flats and big schools. You got those bigger trout running shallow and where the redfish would be, but you got big numbers, 50 to 100 trout sitting on a hole in the flat, and they've been feeding pretty good. You got a sustained 5, 6, 7, 8 mile an hour wind, nothing soft, but nothing heavy. Absolutely. You'd smell it a quarter mile away. There's no question. Now, but just like I said, there are times of the year where it's more prominent because those fish are a little more stacked up or a little bit more numbered during different parts of the year. But absolutely, man, it's a real thing.
Yeah,
Right.
and I'll say before anybody listening or watching just thinks that we're just totally out of our minds, there is some science behind it. So after doing some research, I am not as skeptical as I was before. But the science is that it's just when trout are feeding heavily. I imagine it's other fish too, but I know trout is the stuff that the species that I imagine it happened with bluefish too, or just other fish that are feeding heavily on big schools of bait. But what at least the research that I saw says is that when they're feeding heavily, they'll even be like throwing some up and just fact they're munching on all that small bait fish. The oils and everything from the bait will come to the surface, creating a slick, and the smell from that ends up smelling like watermelon. Coincidentally, they're not obviously feeding on anything like that, but that's the science behind it. That I was just shocked at, because I've always heard oil, the slicks, and I've seen slicks. I've just never really put the watermelon smell to it.
Is there any other science? Because I'm looking on TexasKayakFisherman.com. It's a forum, and there's quite a few people talking about it, but no one seems to be a scientist. They're saying similar things. It's about the oil slick and something in the trout's stomach and how they digest it. Clearly, all these people have Matt and Mark's sense of watermelon. Is there any other science, dudes, that you guys know of?
I see something on Texas Parks and Wildlife saying you could smell for trout. I mean, there's a lot of documentation here. Just got to pick through it.
This guy, Water Hog, says kind of makes you think twice about eating watermelon, knowing it smells like trout puke.
Water Hog.
Yeah, just if you just search on any type of big search platform, Bing, Google, anything like that, you'll see that there's anglers in North Carolina talking about it. I see here Florida, obviously, Texas, South Carolina, Crystal Beach. There's Texas Fish and Game. They talk about it. So yeah, this isn't just something that crazy people down here in the Southeast have kind of gone off on a limb and said that's a thing. This is definitely something that more than just Uncle Jimmy said one day, when he was out on a boat. This is documented, man. I feel like this is a very real thing. I've smelt it. And again, if Luke, you've never been on a whole lot of fish, it's okay to say that, but it's a real thing, man. It definitely is, and I could probably fill up a room with people that would agree with it.
So my big question is, now knowing this, right? I'll put a little bit of thought into focus on sniffing while I'm out there fishing. But this smell, is this something that you use the smell to actually find a spot, or you're in the spot and the smell comes after? Or you put yourself in a good spot and you're so close to it, you smell it, or do you smell it and start looking upwind and go like a mile away and find the fish there?
No, you actually kind of nailed it right there. If I see a slick first, I'll look for the smell, because lots of bait can put off a slick without there being feeding fish in the area. So if there's just a slick, I will pay attention for the smell downwind. But if I get like a whiff of that watermelon smell of the trout regurgitation, and I don't visibly see a slick, yeah, I'll work my way into the wind and see if I can find wherever it is that it's coming from. A good wind and a good slick quarter mile is easy for sure.
It reminds me today, Luke, we were filming on the Pathfinder, and Luke was doing a little bit of smelling, but it was from a little gas that I had, and it was downwind, and Luke got a little choked up there in the camera.
Yeah, that was the time where I was holding the breath.
I was filming too. We got to find that. That's going to be a good outtake.
It's painful.
Well, so yeah,
why you can't smell watermelon.
that's true.
I think it burnt some of my senses.
In Garden and Gun, obviously a popular magazine, they have a topic here. Actually, it's a whole article for the best trout fishing. Follow your nose. So, Luke, it's because I have a feeling Luke is trying to say, don't count on your nose to put you in the right spot. Go find the spots either through trends or through like smart fishing spots, and then you might smell something because you're in a trout spot. This article is saying just follow your nose until you smell something and then stop. What about you, Mark? It sounds like you guys have power pulled down before when you're cruising, you smell the watermelon.
Yeah, that's kind of what we do. We'll be drifting a flat and she'll smell some watermelon, and that's like her thing. She'll just be like, "Hey, I smell watermelon, there's trout." So we'll power pull down, we'll throw all around the boat, and usually we start catching some trout, or we'll just keep drifting. But yeah, she's dead set on it. She actually convinced me because I thought she was crazy, and then I smelled it, and now I can't not smell it. So I'm waiting for the day we have one of our meetings, and you're like, you know what, Mark, Matt, I was out there, I smelled the watermelon.
So, I mean,
Yes.
I'm now trying to think if I can train Otis, because I mean, if a human can smell it, a dog can smell it a whole lot better, and I could train Otis to be like a pointer dog for watermelon scent. Now I've got a big advantage. Now Otis would finally do some good on the boat. So
We should start selling bloodhounds on our site.
yeah, so that's not what I'm trying to think. Like if I can figure out a way to do that.
Yeah, so I think
trout sticker.
I think something that yeah, that's funny. I think something that kind of ties in with that though, that you know, Mark, you said that, y'all will be moving and smell it and stop. I've done that before. I've been full motor to a spot with somebody on their boat, and we've stopped because of the smell, found the slick, and got on fish. But I'll also say, in those spots where we quote unquote followed our nose to the fish, we were in a good feeding zone anyway. We were in the area that the fish would be in regardless. Now, granted, we didn't know they were in that exact spot. We were, going to be covering water, covering that, those textbook feeding zones, but the trout weren't doing this in 30 foot of water in the middle of the channel, mind you. They're doing this in their feeding zone in 3, 4, 5 foot of water where there's potholes, nice grass, in places you could run a boat without, doing any damage to the bottom. You can run a boat on a plane in those areas, but those are in effect their natural feeding ground. So it's not like you're going to be looking for these fish outside of where you would normally be looking for them. So if you were to open up smart fishing spots, go through, the textbook feeding zones, look at some of the smart spots, that's exactly where the fish are going to be. They're going to be where the fish are supposed to be. You're not going to find this in 30 feet of water running a channel. This is something you're going to find when you're in the area that those fish should be in. So if you're already in an area where you think the fish are at and you get a whiff of watermelon, now that could be another indicator that they're there, but you just need to find where exactly they're feeding. So as far as, Joe, you mentioned that article about all you have to do is follow your nose. I don't necessarily agree with that because you probably wouldn't get anywhere if you started following your nose from the marina. You ain't going to go very far, especially if it's low tide. We're going to have some bad smellers there. But if you're in the right feeding zone and you catch a whiff of watermelon and there's no boats around you, doing a party cruise with buckets of Tupperware with watermelon busted out, chances are there's trout in that area feeding in that area that you're in. So you're not going to be finding this in places where you wouldn't find trout. So, that's important. You got to be in the right feeding zone to begin with.
We got to see if we can get a melon layer on smart fishing spots. Probable area for melon scent. Matt, another one. Luke and I did some videos. Gosh, it's been a while now in Louisiana, and what you do there, at least in parts of Venice, there for the big redfish, is you're following these slicks, and on calm days you can see them. You can see them out a mile. But I remember a lot of people were asking, especially newer anglers, what is a slick when you're talking about a slick? Can you explain that? Because you mentioned it a few times, just for the people wondering, hey, what is a slick?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's where you can look at the water and you can visibly tell a difference in the way that water appears on the surface. Sometimes it'll be a little bit more shiny, kind of like there would be if, we've all seen gasoline or oil dropped into water, how it doesn't quite mix, but it leaves a sheen on top. That's kind of what you're looking for when we talk about a slick. Or it'll sometimes look as if the water is moving differently than the rest of the water around it. It'll almost look like one water's going, direction east and the rest is going west. And that's just because of the oil that's sitting on the water. Oil and water don't mix, obviously. So the oil sitting on top of the water reacts differently. It's a different density. So it doesn't move the same. So that's why you're able to see it sitting on the top of the surface and it looking different than what the rest of the water around you would.
Yeah, so this article is it's essentially what we said, but it goes a little bit more depth. And it's talking about, where did it say? Oh, it's spring and early summer, Matt. Kind of what you said, and it said this time of the year, and this is for Louisiana. This Garden and Gun article is the trout go on a feeding binge, and they're known to eat with such abandon that they regurgitate and just keep on chowing through it. The resulting whatever is of this previous meal, what they puke is fish oil, blood, and guts, and it imparts a melon-like aroma and a sheen, which is what Matt just said, on the water surface. Pretty cool. So it's a little bit of a feeding frenzy. So if you do smell it, that means there's probably more than just one or two trout hanging around. You've probably got a pretty big school of them, and they're hungry. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a good point that you just brought up. So when you smell that, you're not finding one fish that's eating. You found multiple fish that are all in a feeding pattern. So much of a feeding pattern that they're eating and just like you said, regurgitating and continuing to feed on through it. So those fish are trying to replenish calories, usually like you said, spring into the early summer. That's when they get their first spawn in of the year. So you usually find that those fish are just trying to replenish those calories from covering a lot of water to find their preferred spawning zones. So that seems to be, probably the most likely, logic there as far as why they do it, and or at least in my opinion, I would just only imagine it's to replenish those calories that they spend through their spawn.
Have you guys ever caught any big trout, like 20 plus, and when smelling this, or is it mostly these little kind of schooly trout that are all just in a feeding frenzy?
So usually when I catch those big ones out of that school, it's on top water. If I know there's a lot of active trout in the area and I keep catching a lot of smaller ones, maybe 15, 16s, but I can hear just by other bait getting intact in the area that that's not a 16-inch trout hit whatever that was. So I'll throw top water or I'll throw the bomber. I'll throw a much, a bait with a larger water presence, whether it be subsurface or top water. My preferred for those bigger trout would definitely be top water. They just seem a little more aggressive on a top water bite, no matter what time of day it is. But to that point, I've actually caught one of those bigger trout on top water, a lower upper 20s and like 22, 23-inch trout, get him in the boat and he actually regurgitate in the boat in my net. After he's, hit my lure and I've got him in. So I do believe that, you can find big ones in those schools, but just, I feel like what we've learned over the years is that's not really common. Those bigger trout usually are more lone wolf McQuades. They hunt solo rather than in big schools.
What about you, Mark?
We don't target trout too often, but we get them out of like Cockroach Bay Flats. They're 16 and up inches. They're nothing too crazy. So, but we have got some pretty thick trout. Just nothing to write home about. But we smell it, we catch. I know that.
Mid-sized melon, baby. Mid-sized melon. That's cool. Well, what else, guys? Anything else we're missing on this? Is there any other lures that you use in this, or is this kind of like, in most cases, you found a feeding frenzy and just throw in a slam shaded 2.0 and grip it and rip it?
Anybody else want to take a shot?
Well, I mean,
I catch them on Slim Shady paddle tails. White paddle tails usually the color of choice for trout. I've won tournaments catching trout on paddle tails. My wife usually will snag the winning trout. So she knows all about trout, I guess.
yeah, I imagine if they're feeding that aggressive, where they're literally eating so much that they're throwing up and still eating, and they're causing that much commotion. I imagine you throw anything in there, they're going to eat it. And I think Matt's tips about picking out the bigger ones is good. Yeah, usually, although I haven't done the watermelon smell, I've fished a lot of the zones where there's just a lot of trout where you're catching a ton of fish. I mean, like almost every cast, and it's usually the small ones. But every once in a while, there's a big one. Like actually, when I was using the underwater rig, I had the Slam Shade 2.0. I caught on camera a 22-inch trout that ate with the camera right in front of it, and as I was going to grab it, it was throwing up like an 8-inch trout. So even through all the schooling commotion, there's high odds of a big one coming through to feed on those other trout that are feeding. So feeding frenzy just really drives everything. I'm sure sharks are in there. I'm sure there's all sorts of stuff. So I would say you want to catch something big, throw something big, and if you want to catch a bunch of fish, throw like a 2.0, like a 3.5-inch paddle tail. Kind of hard to go wrong with that.
Yeah, so I'll just expand a little bit on what you just said, Luke. So you said that about that big trout. When I said if I find a school like that and I want to target the bigger one, I'll go to the baby trout colored skitter walk. And I've caught more over 22 inch, probably, ranging from 22 all the way to 28 being my biggest up to this point. Many of those came on that baby trout colored skitter walk in areas that I found a heavy trout feeding. And that's to kind of we get a little niche there and we talk about targeting those bigger fish in those schools there. But Joe asked a good question to start with about what do you throw in there to catch these. Are they eating anything? Yes, they'll eat anything. They're fired up, as long as the presentation you're using is what works in your area. So for me, in my area, my water's a little more stained. I have a little bit better luck on the Fred color than the Slam Shady here in the Big Bend area. We have a lot of creeks and freshwater runoff, so it just makes the water look a little bit more like sweet tea rather than clear green water, which you have a little bit more of in Tampa Bay, where the Slam Shady tends to really shine there. But for me, kind of throw a little twist in there. One thing I like to do when I get on a bite like that is put a Fred paddle tail under a popping cork, and I will chunk that in those feeding trout schools. And I've found that if you can do that and you can stay on the school, they won't turn off. They won't stop feeding because they are now in competition with each other, because the popping cork sound makes them think that other fish around them are feeding and they're missing out on the frenzy. So if you start creating that feeding frenzy sound, a bunch of around the fish, even if they're not in a feeding pattern at that time. I've triggered many bites on slow days with the popping cork just by making fish think that the others in the area were feeding. So if you can do that, put a popping cork in front of those fish, and now you've created a little bit of an internal competition between those fish. Now they're even more fired up. And I'm talking like every person on your boat could just have, you can't get fish off fast enough if you get in that type of situation, especially, 2, 3 corks running at the same time, sounds coming from different directions. Those fish don't know what to do. It's basic instinct. They just go into full blown feeding pattern.
That's good, man. Super helpful. Well, guys, unless you have anything else, that wraps it up. We love your feedback. This was not a sermon of sorts about melon smells and trout. This was more of our interpretation, a little bit of science trying to back it up. So we'd love to hear if you have smelt it. And it could be one of these where it's kind of like the old asparagus. Some people just can't smell the trout melon. I don't know. That's just wild.
Yeah,
I tried. I mean, I was out there with Mark and his wife. They're like, yeah, you don't smell this? Like, I don't smell anything that smells like watermelon.
Both of them had their noses in the air, like smell. It was there. I'm telling you.
Too funny. But yeah, comment down below. And of course, if you want to go to the next level with us, I'm talking intimate stuff, then come join us in the Salt Strong Insider Club and really get close with us. All of us, amazing coaches, just such an awesome team and a fun team. And the community, it's amazing. It continues to keep growing each and every week, every month. We're approaching, as we record this, getting really close to 50,000 members. Isn't that nuts, guys? 50,000. Who would have thought? It's so cool. So come join us and the other almost 50,000 members. Save time, save money, and ultimately have more fun out on the water. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to you on the next episode. Peace. We out. See ya.
'Cause fishing, it's